Good evening. I'm going to open the December 13th, 2022 Bethel Planning and Zoning meeting. Start with commission introduction. I'm Ken Stevens. I'm chair of the commission.
Judy Grant, Secretary of the Commission.
Rich Tibbetts, commission member. Kenny Parks.
Heather Kessler, Commission member.
Thank you. Just a couple reminders about tonight's continuation. We are going to continue the public hearing for 9 and 11 Diamond Avenue to allow staff and the applicant to respond to the questions that were raised at our last meeting on November the 22nd. And when that has been concluded, we'll open the floor to public comments and questions again. See if there's anything additional from the public. And as I asked last time, I would just like to ask again this time, each of us be considerate of others in the room. We all are neighbors and friends around here. And I have no problem sharing booing or other disruptions during the meeting. I would really appreciate that. After Beth Cavagna and the applicant responded, you'll be free to come up and speak. When speaking, please come to the mic, state your name and address before beginning your comments or questions, and please stick to the issue at hand. So with that, I will resume the public hearing for 9 and 11 Diamond Avenue and ask Beth to start with her responses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we get into that, there was just one other matter that needed to be clarified for the general public and new commission members, but you're all pretty old here. That has to do with sending emails or text messages or phone calls to your friends and or neighbors that are on the board. It's come to my attention that that has been occurring. To what degree, I don't know. But it is very, very important. You have to look at the Planning and Zoning Commission in dealing with these type of matters as being similar to a judge and a jury. You can't speak to them about the matter. You can't email them about the matter or have any communication about that while this proceeding is going on, either before when an application is accepted, during a public hearing, or after a public hearing. It's called, I don't want to get into the legal aspects of it, and I'm going to respectfully ask the applicant's attorney not to do that either. But it's called ex parte communication, and boards, land use boards and commissions have lost cases in the court system because of that activity. It's a technicality. But going forward with this application in front of us this evening, what I did for the commission was to try to answer questions that were asked in regards to the application. And in regards to those questions, there was just a few that were truly questions that staff can answer objectively for the general public. One is dealing with building elevations. There was a question asked in regards to building elevations when considering a zone change. In response to that question, in regards to the existing dwellings is what I'm assuming across the street. The question is dealing with height versus allowances in the industrial zone or the industrial park zone. Up to 4 stories is allowable through a special permit in the industrial or industrial park zone. If a change is made to the TOD, the height allowance remains the same, but at the discretion of the commission. So 4 stories basically is what I'm saying is allowable in both zones. Someone had asked a question as to what urban sprawl is, the definition. They wanted the definition of urban sprawl. The Town of Bethel Land Use Commissions use the illustrated book of developmental definitions from Rutgers University. So the definition from that book is as follows: poorly planned, auto-dependent growth, usually of a low density, single use in nature previously rural areas and some distance from existing development and infrastructure. Again, I'm sorry, this is the first time I've used a map, so can you guys understand me? Okay. When was the property zoned industrial? This area was zoned industrial with the exception of zoning regulations adopted in 1959. A list of allowable present-day uses is found in the Google Drive. Staff reviewed with the commission previous historical uses associated with this area, and that's found in my staff report. There was some question about the Economic Development Commission's role in the TOD. The commission's role in developing the FJ Park was invaluable, but the ED's role within the town has expanded to include all commercial aspects of the town. Their input during the TOD planning process was helpful in formulating the plan along with their heavily involved executive director. And that's all I have to offer at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Marcus, are you ready?
We are, yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Commission of the Public, Neil Marcus, Tone Wolf, PC 158, Deer Hill Avenue, on behalf of the applicant, who unfortunately was ill in Israel. He called me driving here this evening, told me he would be on time, but I told him to go home. Unfortunately, he's got 2 young children, and the whole family seems to be down with something. And quite honestly, looking at the number of you wearing what I'm wearing, I thought it was a good idea that he not be here. However, as was announced earlier, we have a couple of members of the commission who appear to be out as well for similar reasons. And this matter will be continued. So if you have any questions of the applicant himself that I can't answer, or Joe also can't answer, we'll certainly get them answered for you by the continued hearing date. The members of the public spoke in some length, obviously, at the last hearing, but we also had received a number of written correspondence, emails, and the like that were submitted to the office prior to the last meeting, and we really had the opportunity to comment on them. And I'm going to take a few minutes to briefly answer some of the letters, most of which were opposed to changing the zone as requested on this site from industrial TOD. The first email that I saw was from, I think, Rosemary Pagliaro, and the general gist of her concern is that she has a lot of criticism of the construction that's taking place next to the Bethel Library, and feels that somehow the design issues have not been properly addressed, and talked about her prior concerns when she lived in the town of Shelton. I just want to be clear that the application that's before you this evening is for a zone change. The concept plan has been submitted and actually was reviewed informally with the commission even before the zone change application was filed. So for people who are concerned that the ultimate product that comes out of a TOD project needs careful review, I can't say that I disagree. I do agree, actually. And the design of the project that I've seen so far in the concept is architecturally very much in keeping with the character of Bethel. And actually, the buildings themselves are fairly high end. Some of these, of course, some of these emails are just 1 or 2 liners saying I'm opposed, so I really can't address them. But there's a rather lengthy email from Maureen Archwinski, it looks like, and that she raises the point that when she moved to Bethel, she said it was a lovely little New England town, but she doesn't feel that that's still the same. And that she says, thanks to the ridiculous amount of development that's been allowed to happen here. So the gist of her objection to this zone change is that Bethel is overdeveloped. She raises concern with over paving of the downtown area. And to this, I have to comment that Bethel has a master plan, and I'll more about that from some of the other critics of the zone change. Bethel has a master plan, and Bethel has zoning regs. And Bethel has, all of that would be considered a long-range plan. And to the extent that we have made this application, it is to comply with the master plan and comply with the zoning regulations. We are not here to ask this commission or even the public at this point to have a referendum on the master plan, for example, or the TOD zone. That's happened already. And quite honestly, whenever you make any change in zoning or in planning for any town, there'll be a certain percentage of the population that doesn't support it. If it's 50%, it probably won't pass. But when you get 20%, 15% who feel that's not my vision of the future, that really doesn't control the ultimate land use patterns, because the 75 or 80% probably carry the day. So this application to change the zone reflects the fact that we actually think that the town, this commission and some of its predecessors, gave a lot of thought to the plan of development and the ultimate zoning regs that come out of it. And having said that, I'm looking at Nancy over there. I saw Nancy Sudik before, and I'm now reading her well-drafted letter. But Nancy talks about the character of the town, the ugly buildings, the traffic, and again, that goes to the point that I'm trying to make, which is we will address, and Joe Balsam will talk about how we're handling traffic for our site. We're not going to correct what anybody perceives as the traffic was for the grant, or what anybody perceives were the building designs next to the library. But that's no reason to judge this application anything but objectively and independently. So, but Nancy, the one thing I must say is in your letter, you say that if the Bethel master plan and the TOD are the excuse for granting a zoning exception, this is not a zoning exception. And if any of you think that we're asking for something exceptional or extraordinary or out of line, I don't think we are. We are asking to use a specific piece of property and change the zone so it can be developed under the TOD concept as opposed to the industrial zone of the last 50 years. So we're not asking for anything exceptional. And again, the question is, how do you control the character of the town going forward? Because quite honestly, the character of Bethel today is certainly not the character of the Bethel of my youth. I grew up next door in Danbury. But even for the, believe it or not, 50 years that I have actually, I find it hardly lived right on the Bethel-Reading line and driven through Bethel virtually every day. But I don't just drive through, I stop, I shop, I go to the market, I go to the cleaners, I go to the hardware store. So I've participated in what I think is the renaissance of downtown Bethel. And quite honestly, there are those of you who will think that the Dolan gas station and the yard were, something that are fond memories. And I have fond memories too. I knew the Dolan family, obviously. And they contributed a great deal to Bethel. But the Bethel of this year, 2022, is not a Bethel of building supplies or fuel supplies or the like on Greenwood Avenue. And to that extent, the Bethel of tomorrow may not be the industrial use that we currently have on Diamond Avenue. Our current property owner, I'm very fond of it. It does a great job. In the comments at last session of our first hearing, we're very supportive and very complimentary to the current property owners. But I have to recognize, because I look in the mirror sometimes when I shave and I actually take my mask off, that I'm not getting any younger and they're not getting any younger. And I recognize that they have the right to try to move on and transition their property to something which they feel is appropriate and well designed. So the fact is, we are not here to make a presentation to the commission seeking a zoning amendment that will either maintain a status quo or move Bethel backwards in time to a different era. We are looking at a very progressive application because, quite honestly, that's the signal that we've gotten from the town of Bethel. And I don't think we've misunderstood the signal, but the question from a lot of these emails is, why did you do that? Why did you consider changing the town and moving forward into a different period? So that's a problem. There was a comment from Barbara Sarabia that is worried about wetlands and traffic. Well, again, showed the focus and talk about traffic. And on the wetlands, I thought that Adriano touched on it briefly in the concept plan. We've certainly talked about it more in the informal presentation of the concept plan. His idea is to enhance the site and take advantage of the set aside of this considerable amount of open space to preserve wetlands and habitats. So again, that's not directly the issue before the commission tonight on its own change amendment or zoning map amendment, but that is certainly a concern that we've tried to address, and we will address in the review that goes forward on the specific site approvals. A couple of the lengthier letters that were addressed, again, I'm looking at a letter from Dana McNeary, who's a 3-year resident of Wolf Phipps Road. And I guess I commend her for taking an interest in the development of downtown, because she just moved here and she actually doesn't live downtown. And says that she's sending this as an observer, that she's, and compares it to her experiences in Tennessee and in Nashville, and more particularly in Los Angeles. Well, quite honestly, I don't see any similarity at all between Bethel, Connecticut and the Los Angeles that I know. The complaint from this writer is that the TOD proposals, TOD regulations are just not realistic. And again, that there are a lot of issues of traffic that exist in Bethel. But the current traffic situation needs to be addressed, but not in the context of this application. The question here is, if we change the property that we've requested for rezoning to the TOD zone, will that have a likely negative impact on traffic? And if that's not the conclusion, then it will, if the conclusion is the opposite, which is our conclusion, then the problems of traffic today in Bethel really don't belong at this hearing. I mean, we do have a Public Utilities Commission, we have a Police Commission, and we have other agencies that really have to deal with that. So I recognize that this writer is concerned because she comes in new to the area and says, well, there's a lot of traffic. I didn't expect it. But there was an interesting phrase in her letter that says, bolded, the board is already seeing problems arising from the master plan / TOD overlay regulation. And it's hot time to hit the pause button. Again, I am not familiar with what those problems are that the board has seen, but they were not identified on here. And quite honestly, I thought some of the housing that has been developed in the TOD is actually very well accepted. Projects that I am familiar with are 100% occupied. B, the buildings themselves are much better kept than some of the old houses that they replaced. And it seems that the people who are landlords or developers that have taken advantage of the TOD zoning reg have actually done it with they've been diligent, and they so I'm not sure what the problems are, and it would be helpful because then maybe if we knew what those problems were, we would make sure in the design of our project that we address them so they didn't occur again. The concluding comment of this letter, though, is that the master plan isn't written in stone, but it certainly looks like a blueprint for development, the way Bethel wants to go. Of course, the master plan is not written in stone. It's quite opposite. Statutorily, we rewrite and review the master plan every 10 years. But that it's in itself is indicative of the fact that we see this fluid document changing as the times change. In zoning and planning is not cast in stone. So I agree there, it's not written in stone, but the problem with the conclusion of this letter is, but when you rewrite it, you screw it up, which is not the case. In the beginning of this letter, there's an interesting comment. I chose Bethel over many other towns in Fairfield County because of its quaint small town feel. As a single woman, I feel safe here. Little did I know when I moved here that Bethel has a master plan to develop the town. Well, with all due respect, that's required. The state of Connecticut requires Bethel to have a master plan. And it's a little unusual that somebody, who takes an interest, as this writer seems to, in the downtown Bethel, in the development, and is choosy about her location, would miss that fact that, of course, there's a master plan. And in reality, it gets rewritten every 10 years, and the current master plan is relatively current. It's just that it's new. So, of course, the letter, there's a lengthy letter here that is from Janice Moy. And I believe she actually read this entire letter, or if she didn't, she spoke at length at the last meeting about her concerns with the neighborhood. But summarizing her concerns really is the same criticism of, and she says it right in the middle of page 2, that my first reaction to the 9/11 project, when I thought they were talking about the far east end of Diamond, was the one most people have had, including my longtime neighbor, who will be 100 at Christmas time, in bold letters. Are they crazy? So again, this letter, fortunately for me as an attorney for the applicant, does not criticize our plan specifically. But the gist of the letter, and it's very apparent, is that the writer, who is a longtime resident of this neighborhood and has a sincere concern about the development of the neighborhood, just feels that the Planning and Zoning Commission is headed in the wrong direction, has adopted a master plan that is improper, and that includes a TOD zone. So if your mindset is that the regulations are all wrong, then obviously our application that complies with the regulations tries to achieve the objective of the regulations, can't be an application that you support. So that's the concern that was conveyed by the Moy letter. The other. There was a letter from Leaford Tufay. And this criticizes our rezoning on the basis that that it's going to impact wetlands, impact negative. And again, I don't think that that in reality, if you look at the concept plan, you can really reach that conclusion. But I realize that a lot of people who wrote letters did it before they heard the application at the last meeting. That's just standard operating procedure in this business. And that a lot of people don't really spend the time to focus on the details of the plans. In this case, it's only a concept plan anyway. But if you see the concept plan and you heard Adriano speak at the last meeting, you will know that he's taken painstaking concerns with protecting and enhancing the wetlands and the natural aspects of the site. And to that extent, his proposal is a very balanced proposal that will be, as we've seen, a combination of taller and shorter buildings, single-family townhouses and row houses, and multi-families with a mixture of commercial, retail, maybe some office. And again, I think we've used the term of the village concept. And that's what it is. And interestingly enough, it's a throwback to everybody who's saying, well, we've ignored the past and we don't like what we see in the future. This is actually a throwback to the Garden City design, which is dear to me because about 60 years ago, quite almost 60 years ago, I wrote my college thesis on the Garden City design in the United States, which came over actually from Great Britain. And of course, the famous Garden City is Garden City, Long Island, but Sunnyside Park in Queens was one of the early garden cities. And the leaders of the movement, people like Buckminster Fuller. And they talked about the village concept with the walking paths where you had retail so that you could actually go to the store in those days, the neighborhood market. But today we talk about the convenience store, you know, without ever having to get in an automobile or on a bus in New York, on the subway. And the Garden City design is what we now talk about as villages. So to a certain extent, for those of the public who say, well, this is just way out there, it's actually somewhat of a return to a concept that was well received, and in some areas has just lived on. I mean, there are parts of there are projects that I wrote about so many years ago where I have visited and I say, you know, they've changed. I mean, they've been renovations, whatever, but the basic concept is still there. So my comments, my few comments is that they are sincere, and I actually appreciate it. And hopefully the commission in reviewing them will appreciate them too, because they reflect legitimate concerns. But unfortunately, I have to take issue with those concerns were not directly with the zone amendment that's before the commission now. And a lot of those concerns will be raised when the commission gets to hopefully review this project as a site plan and a special permit as we move forward with the actual real development concept as opposed to just the conceptual designs. So hoping that as the public continues to participate in this application, that you focus on what we are trying to achieve. And we are certainly open to suggestions or criticisms of where we may be overreaching. If the issue is that the concept of our buildings are too high and they should be lower, we look at that. If the thinking is the density should be less than what is there, we can look at that. But the idea of abandoning the TOD zone in Bethel is not something that we hope comes out of this review. Because I think, quite honestly, if you read the literature on planning in Connecticut, generally, this concept is right at the front of the line. We're not behind the eight ball on this one. We're leading the pack in Bethel by trying to develop transit-oriented housing and development. And one of the letters said, good luck getting people to ride a train to New York City when it takes 2 hours. Well, quite honestly, there are people who do commute to New York City from Bethel today, and it does take 2 hours, and it's not convenient sometimes to get to the station. But on the other hand, I do look forward to the time when people will actually hop a train to Norwalk or hop a train to Stanford. That occurs a little bit now, but as we move into the next phase of transportation in this country, this is the type of stuff that we need to plan for. So the question is, do we wait 20 years and then start planning for something that's already occurred? Or do we try to foresee what we want to develop and take some control over our own destiny? So this application is more in the line of taking that control and coming up with a plan now that doesn't wait to the time that an industrial zone property is completely out of line with what's going on in the downtown Bethel and the whole concept. We can take the opportunity now of changing it to accommodate forward thinking. So that's where we are. We're going to ask Joe to come up for a minute and comment on the questions that were given concerning traffic that he was working on. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. And to Neil's point about the 2-hour train ride, what we're seeing now is work from home. So a 2-hour train ride actually isn't a big deal. I know, I'm getting it. Joe Balskis with VHB. I worked on the TOD plan as the transportation planner 6 years ago. Been in this room several times doing that. Heard a lot of positive feedback on that. That's why you have the plan you have today. But that comment will make that what we're seeing now is work from home is affecting our traffic numbers. And a 2-hour train ride seems like a long time, but twice a week it isn't a big deal. We're actually seeing that happening. So again, Joe Balskis, traffic engineer for the project, compared the traffic presentation last time. You saw that. I will say a lot of times I didn't involve a zone change. We don't have a detailed plan that you've got. We're trying to figure out what could go into zone, and what kind of use could it be, and what's the size of it. And the beauty of this is that we have that. We actually have a plan that allowed at least myself to be able to understand the traffic that's being generated. So from a standpoint of the questions last time, I had 2 questions that I found from writing my notes down. The first question was regarding reduction of traffic in switching from industrial zone to residential zone. I think there's a question on that. So the basic question is if you have industrial uses and you remove that and put residential, there's gonna be more traffic. Well, it depends. Okay, it depends on what type of industrial use, depends on what type of residential use you have. If you're going to a warehouse and you go to 350 units of condos, yeah, that's going to generate more traffic. If you're going to more intense industrial use, where you may have manufacturing, you may have a more warehousing, you may have distribution center, you'll have more employees, you'll have truck traffic. So you have a different kind of traffic that will be generated. Overall, you should see a reduction from industrial to residential in this context. But if you have industrial, you will see vastly more trucks. You're shaking your head, vastly more trucks. I just finished a 2.5 million square foot distribution center in Starkville. And I will tell you, we had lots and lots of trucks being generated versus residential there. So also the numbers I quoted to you last time, 2,100 trips per day. roughly, as a fraction of the 8,500 projected for the TOD plan. That's conservative. That doesn't count for you living there, work from home for the day, so in New York City to go to work or Stanford, and you want to get a coffee. You want to go eat lunch at the restaurant, or go to a fitness center. Those aren't really considered here. So there's gonna be that kind of traffic that's expected. This kind of development is expected to do that. More people walking within the development and walking to Bethel Center. And I mentioned work from home trends. So that's the response to that one. Question number 2 is clarification of traffic to Danbury. Someone asked a question last time about how much traffic is going to Danbury, and I did briefly review that. We're projecting about 60% of the traffic for this development to be going towards Danbury. That's based upon the TOD plan. That's based upon traffic trends. So if you look at that in terms of 2,100 trips per day projected with this plan versus the Bethel Forward plan, you're looking at about 1,200, 1,300 vehicles that are going on Grassy Plain Street going to Danbury. The rest are going down south, west of Grassy Plain Street. The rest are going to Bethel Center, going points east, and going to points southeast to the south. So that's our projection of what's happening there in terms of where and how they get to Danbury for this. All right. So as Neil mentioned, the traffic issue. So they're going to be fully addressed in the detailed traffic impact study. So the site plan application, special permit, we are going to be doing more traffic counts. We're going to do more detailed traffic analysis. We have to, not just because of the town, because of the state. The Office of State Traffic Administration, this will require a major traffic generator permit from the state of Connecticut. As part of that process, which will be done in parallel with this, as well as after this site plan process, we will be required to look at the intersections that are potentially impacted in the area, including Diamond Avenue at Agreement Avenue. Any other intersection that we see traffic being generated at from a significant impact potentially, we will be reviewing that as part of the state process. So the town approval process, as well as the state approval process. And that may include improvements. That may include improvements on Green Avenue at Grassy Plain Street. We know that not Grassy Plain, Greenwood and Diamond Avenue. We know there's been some issues in the past. We identified that as part of the TOD plan. I looked at that. Looked at High Street at Green Avenue. We looked at the center. So we know there's some potential issues there. That was 6 years ago. What's happening today? How the traffic volumes, are they similar to they were 6 years ago? Are they different? So we'll be looking at that as part of the site plan application, as well as for the state of Connecticut. And they cannot build this without approval from the Office of State Traffic Administration. So that concludes my response to 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Beth, did you have anything else to add before we open it to the public? At this time, I invite the public to come up to the mic. Please remember to state your name and your address before you begin asking your questions or making your comments.
Paul Fredericks, 13 Whitney Road. Now I'm more nervous. 60% of the traffic is going out to Grassy Plain and up to Danbury. Guess what? They don't go straight up. They go up Elgin and Whitney to beat the lights. You see it all the time, and they do it at speed. And it's going to be a highway. That's my one point.
This is just a question about the traffic, because I think I may be misunderstood.
State your name and address.
I'm sorry, Nancy Sudik, 2 Ridgedale Road, sorry. My question is, you talked about industrial, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name already. Joe, I knew that. Joe, you mentioned that industrial, can generate huge trucks and all this kind of traffic. But have you been on Diamond Avenue? Have you seen Diamond Avenue? There is no traffic on Diamond Avenue. None. Zero. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Don't fall.
Allison St. Germain, 14 Elgin Avenue. Thank you, Mr. Marcus, for reading a lot of the letters that were submitted beforehand. I did submit a lengthy letter that had some specific questions that weren't addressed. So if that could be answered at some point, that would be great. In the ensuing time, over the past few weeks, there have been a few more questions that have popped up, and then I want to give the commission some other questions that we've been thinking about. For this project, what comes first? Is it the entire project all at once? Is it the 4 buildings in the back, the 4 stories in the back? What's to say that we get 200 apartments and 4 buildings in the back, and then there's no commercial along the front? Those are 2 beautiful properties right now, like we've said, that are operating. You know, obviously the Kellogg lumber is they were cutting this morning. I could smell the wood. So what comes first in this entire project? Because obviously the zone change is for the project. So that would be interesting to know, because are we just going to get 200 more apartments stuck in the back? Again, the bridge, the land that's going to be donated for the bridge, the pedestrian bridge across, in the concept plan that was presented in July, the applicant did say that it was a pedestrian bridge, and the idea would be that there would be a kiss and ride. More cars, potentially not even from residents that live there, that would be dropping people off at the pedestrian bridge to maybe avoid the traffic coming across Greenwood Ave, who knows? So what potential could that be as well? And if that pedestrian bridge never gets built because that's not being provided by the applicant, that would be something that we've heard that would have to be covered by grants and things that we would have to apply from the town. So we don't even have the money right now to build a pedestrian bridge. So if that doesn't happen, then we just still have buildings with apartments. The other concern about talking about this is a new village center in another downtown area. It'd be very interesting to know, and I know that this is a planning and zoning commission, but we also don't operate in silos. And you work very closely with the economic development plan board. But what is our overall economic health looking like with empty storefronts now or available space? And so what would this be adding square footage wise to potentially, on top of what we already have in town, to be competing with business owners currently with new businesses? My kids go to Bethel Music right down the street, and I know that this applicant was talking about this being a new arts and music, maybe drawing venue. Well, I know just from going to Bethel Music that there's been a lot of change there, right? Their rates have had to go up. Things are getting more expensive, and for a small business like that specializes in music and industry in this area, what would this do to them? Who knows? But that's something to consider. So much more, how much more square commercial space is there that then our Economic Development Commission is going to have to also help sell people to fill, right? And again, I'd like to know how hard is it to do that. I also want to address that there were some really cool points that were brought up in the last month with our need for industrial in the town. And so many of you know that a lot of the neighbors have been together over the past few months, started with a few other projects around, but so this specifically to start to try to do a petition to see what is the pulse out there. And so we have a Facebook group of over 365 people. Some of you here in this room have joined it. So thank you. You can see the information that is being shared there. But we started a Say No to a Zone Change petition. I'm more than happy to give you the printout of this and then some of the comments obviously on there. So feel free to go to it. Mr. Marcus, you can send your applicant so you can see what some people are saying. We are really concerned about the existing industrial property. It's very well maintained. It has little impact, like we just heard, on the traffic in that area. And that street area is mostly 1 family, 2 family homes. The 4 or 5 streets, when you're talking about Farnham Hill, High, Diamond, the outlier is the Grand, but we won't go there. But we also know that the other industrial properties along Diamond are not in the zone change. Potentially could be in the future if this goes through for these, but we also know that any future industrial development would have to also meet the town's industrial regulations. The other thing, number 2, is that Bethel is already spending upwards of 1.2 million taxpayer dollars to develop the Francis J. Clark Industrial Park. And so changing this 12 acres, which is also now industrial, if we're in such need of industrial land, what use would that have? So does this conflict with the town's master plan and economic development? Because again, we don't live in silos. We might be one commission and other commissions, but it's a town that works together. Obviously, industrial development also creates jobs, creates and gives the tax revenues on real estate and personal property, but then it also does not overburden our school system, overburden traffic, water, sewer. And so what we're hearing from a lot of our neighbors is that they're very concerned, very overwhelmed about the potential impacts on all of those other silos in our towns. And we know that they don't work alone. So, so far, the people who have signed the petition want to share that with people. So we will give this to the commission. More than welcome. I will send Beth a link to that online if she hasn't already, but we really wanted to share that. There are a vast many more people than what you see here in this room that have a lot more concerns about the zone change, and that's what we wanted to share.
Vote for the record, we are in receipt of say no to a zone change petition presented by Allison St. Germain. Anyone else?
Very much. John Schmucker, 245 Greenwood Avenue, Bethel, Connecticut. I appreciate everyone being here tonight. It's almost Christmas. I appreciate everyone being here at the last meeting. As I mentioned earlier, I served on the Planning and Zoning Commission in Bethel in the past. I used to listen to a lot of objections for things like this development that's being proposed with the zone change for Diamond Avenue. When I sat in your position, I was always asked a couple of things. One is, if someone came in and said, I just don't like it, you say, well, why don't you like it? And does it fit? And what can we do? And please give us some facts. So tonight, I think that what's important for this commission to understand is that we're giving you 3 facts, okay? 3 facts. The first fact is that you have existing property owners in that petition. In case you haven't looked at it, there's 169 people in the town of Bethel signed a petition saying they don't want this zone changed. 169 people. And they're saying that they're happy with this industrial zone, including all the people surrounding the property. So you have 169 of your residents, the town of Bethel, saying they're very happy with the zone. They don't want it changed because they like the neighborhood. So the first fact is the neighbors don't want it changed. They're happy with it. The second fact that was given also is it's in conflict with the Town Economic Development Commission spending our taxpayer money to fund 4 lots in the Clark Industrial Park. So if the town is spending with the state our taxpayer dollars, it is approved by the Board of Selectmen to do 4 industrial lots at approximately 1.5 million. Why would we get rid of industrial land? It's available for development today, right at the bottom of the hill. It has sewer, it has water, it has gas. In fact, my numbers based upon the plan in the town of Bethel shows that of available industrial land, industrial, not industrial park, is only 2.9%. It's almost no land available for development, and it's right at the bottom of the hill. And these people are saying they're happy with it. That's number 2. Industrial development creates jobs, and it creates industry, and it doesn't, number 3, fact number 3, overburden the town's school system in any way. So we're giving you 3 facts, very clearly saying the residents don't want it. 169 people signed so far. Number 2, the town is supporting industrial development, and we're paying for it. It's right down at the bottom of the hill. I also point out something else. So the Economic Development Commission hired, in case you don't know it, Vantage Realty in Danbury. They're the firm you see all the signs in the Clark Industrial Park. Vantage Realty. So one of the questions is, how valuable is industrial land right now in the area? Some people say, should we have spent the money to develop it? So let me read you the letter, which I'll give to the commission for my record, from Vantage Realty. So they say that we already have a good amount of demand for the existing lots that are going to be put in for the Clark Industrial. So they can figure they're going to sell them right away. He also states there's a very high demand for industrial units. I think the best size is in the 2,000 to 3,000 square foot range. We see strong demand and low inventory of all sizes. So your town's trying to develop it, and the top firm they've hired, Advantage Realty, is saying, we need more. So here's the letter from the firm put out, hired by the town, pass these out saying, we need industrial land. I don't see any reason why we would eliminate industrial land. We're paying tax dollars for it. And the town says we need it, the developer, now who hired from the commercial real estate says, we need much more industrial land. It's available at the bottom of the hill. It's a beautiful property, it can be developed. So we've given you 3 facts. That's what you need, facts. Finally, I'd like to address 2 things: communication and vision. Have an odd concept tonight, communication and vision. So there's a very famous movie. Some people have seen it. If you hold it up, full hand, Luke. And there's a very famous line in that movie, perhaps the most famous of all lines. The line is, as he talks to Paul Newman, what we have here is a failure to communicate. Y'all remember it? What we have here is a failure to communicate. So we have an out-of-town developer who last meeting comes in an hour late from New York City while everyone sat here for a full hour and wanted to communicate his vision for our town. His vision for our town. His vision, he talks about another community, another town center. He talks about retail and arts and music and event spaces on Diamond Avenue. So that's his vision for an out-of-town developer. What am I missing? Can I ask what I'm missing? As a 50-year resident of the town of Bethel, what am I missing? If I go into town, if I go out this door, right across, right on the town lawn, all summer long, we have free concerts. We have a bandstand. If I go out this door to the library that I serve on the board of directors, we have an arts council. Every month we invite artists to come in and put up their art. So we have art. We have restaurants in our downtown. We have music and we have concerts, and all summer long we have La Zingarda, and we have Note Kitchen, and we have Notch, and all these restaurants. In our downtown that already exists, we have Winterfest. In fact, 2 weeks ago, when I left this meeting, 2 days later, we had a downtown. We had Winterfest. In the summer, in the fall, we had the whole vision where we had our kids walking down through trick or treat. Anybody go to that? Our downtown was mobbed. Matter of fact, my granddaughter won first place in the Halloween costume contest. So that is the existing town of Bethel, and that is our downtown. Those are our merchants, and we protect them. We don't need another vision for the town of Bethel because we already have it. That's what we have. We have our downtown and our merchants. So I'd say that's a failure to communicate. If that developer had gone through our downtown, his vision, we already have it. Thank you, but we already have it. The last thing I'd like to say, no offense to Mr. Marcus, he's also a friend of mine. But when you start talking about Richfield, you start talking about Four Corners and Brookfield as good examples. We love this town. We don't want to be Brookfield. We don't want to be Ridgefield. We want to be Bethel. We want our downtown to exist as Bethel. I'll add one last comment. My last comment is that we hear developers come in regularly basis and talk about affordable housing. Affordable housing is an interesting concept. But I would tell you that when I did the numbers for the town of Bethel in 2021, Bethel had achieved over 6% affordable housing. In fact, we rated number 3 in Fairfield County, Connecticut, by Fairfield County, talking about creating more affordable housing. And unless I'm mistaken, Mr. Marcus lives in Reading, Connecticut. And if you live in Reading, Connecticut, you'll know that the percentage of affordable housing is less than 1/2 of 1% after 20 years. Less than 1/2 of 1%, but Bethel has achieved 6%. So I would say, if you like this concept and you have a train station, that you take this project and bring it to Reading. Thank you.
Those are the record, we're in receipt of communication between John Schumacher and Chris Cosio of Advantage Realty. Thank you.
Janice Moy, 10 Diamond Avenue. I have some comments and questions, mostly from the last meeting, but I'd like to address Attorney Marcus's characterization of my letter. I don't think that I said anything in my letter about the TOD. My points were specific to the master plan and how that relates to Diamond Avenue specifically. I'm not opposed to TOD. I voted for it. There are many good things about it. So don't get the idea that this is just TOD bashing or somehow we're all just lumping this into one basket. We're being, I think, very specific. Some comments from the last meeting. This zone change will not clean up the unsightly mess seen from the train station. And I'm wondering if there isn't something that can be done to fix that in terms of compliance issues or what, because like it or not, if the townhomes are built at 9/11, they're going to have to look at that unsightly mess. I would not buy something that had to look out on that. Bad enough that the train station has to. People on Diamond Avenue fronts of those two buildings, which are bad enough. But if you build back into 9 and 11 Diamond Avenue, that's what there is. It's starting to seem to me like the part of Bethel that's west of the tracks is being viewed as just an extension of Danbury by town, by developers. I don't think I've ever been so aware of living on the wrong side of the tracks. At the last meeting, Attorney Marcus said there's nothing like this in Bethel now. And so one has to ask the question, why not? And maybe it's because it just doesn't belong, or it doesn't belong in downtown or near downtown. As to the claim of opening up green space, if I'm reading the concept plan correctly, talks about allowing access to the wetlands area, protecting the wetlands area. And that access is not a guaranteed thing. But if I'm correct, the majority of the units are being built on the floodplain, which I don't think is hardscaped right now. So at the same time that you're adding auto traffic, which is definitely not the point of TOD, green space is disappearing. So no amount of landscaping on this project is going to reduce the serious net positive carbon emissions that come from it. Regarding traffic, the pedestrian bridge is a dream. Farnham Hill Extension is pure fantasy. That's not going to happen. And for better or worse, the master plan counted on that. And that exit out to Durant Avenue from the backside. That means that all of the traffic from 9/11 is going to come right by my house. I think everybody on the board and the traffic engineer may know Beth, but you don't know what it's like to live on that road. And you need to come and drive around my neighborhood with me when I can drive again. And understand that these are the present realities, which will only be made exponentially worse by this project. First, it's difficult, dangerous, and often impossible to make a left turn onto Greenwood Avenue from Grand Street. The only plus to the backed up traffic on Greenwood is that sometimes the kind soul may let you cut in front of them since they've already waited 3 or 4 times for the light to change, probably having been backed up almost to the Sycamore sometimes the day. It isn't much easier to turn left off of Diamond Avenue onto Greenwood up there. Part of that is the triangle mess and other issues. People who live in my neighborhood and anyone who understands human nature know that none of the traffic headed to Danbury will go out to Greenwood and turn right on Grassy Plain. A traffic study for that is almost useless. The real study should be whether or not Elgin and Whitney can handle all that traffic, because that's what will happen. Human nature doesn't want to sit at a light with no right on red, only to have to hit another light a block away. I can't believe that Elgin and Whitney can handle this increase from this project. Never mind when the 42 units are built. And that adds on. According to the master plan, this is only the start for Diamond Avenue. And it seems also, according to the master plan, that Elgin and Whitney were recognized as residential areas when the plan was developed. And it's expected that people are going to continue living there, unlike those of us on Diamond. Returning from Danbury is even worse. The lucky people take Fleetwood and head straight up Whitney. The not so fortunate have to make a left turn on to Whitney at Savings Bank of Danbury, and you're pretty much taking your life into your hands because there's another left turn lane facing you and 2 lanes of traffic coming at you that you can't see around that line of stop traffic. That is a major accident waiting to happen. Only slightly less difficult and dangerous is turning onto Diamond Avenue from Greenwood, crossing traffic that is coming around the curve to cut down to get onto our street. Funneling traffic to Grand Street, High Street, or Farnham Hill is not going to be easily for those streets. They're very narrow. They can't handle them. So there's really no good ways and safe ways to get into our neighborhood if you're coming from the Danbury area. One other point on traffic is a study that I have. Traffic forecasts are often inaccurate. This is an article in Planetizen. It's a planning magazine online, taking off on Planet and Planning and Citizen. I'll just quote from this and then I'll give you the actual study. This is their summary, 2014. In a new article published in Transport Reviews, 2 researchers from Aalborg University in Denmark show that decision makers should probably take the forecasts with a pinch of salt. After reviewing the largest studies that compare forecasts with actual demand, they conclude that, quote, "It is clear that demand forecast inaccuracy is problematic for all project types. The studies included in the review examined projects on all 6 continents from the 1960s to 2012. The review confirms earlier results from individual studies that have shown road traffic to be underestimated on average and rail patronage to be overestimated on average. So, with all respect, Joe, this is a good study and a study of studies, of ex post studies. Finally, and I'm not going to be as long as I was last time, the Bethel is a wonderful place to call. I used to think that. And several other people did too. Until large buildings were dropped next to them or behind them, and they moved to Danbury. In our case, it would be directly across from us. Almost no one knows about the master plan. I've talked to so many people in Bethel, and they're like, what are you talking about? I remember TOD, I don't remember anything about a master plan or about fleshing out the general concept of TOD. Because almost no one knows about the master plan, 6 families have bought property on Diamond Avenue since the plan was approved. They and others of us have invested improvements with no clue that any of this might be coming. And I wonder how that is. I mean, it's not like we're adults or, not up on what's happening in Bethel. We thought we'd found a wonderful place to call home. Now we're not so sure. And several people who've bought feel completely betrayed. They wonder why they were even allowed to look at property without somebody saying, oh, by the way, the town has this plan. And before you invest, you ought to know about that. But they bought. And we're wondering if anybody has any sort of realistic idea about what's going to happen to our property values, or if anybody cares. Some of the folks in this town who can least afford a loss live on Diamond Avenue. And if we want or need to sell, who on earth is going to give us top dollar? We all feel like we're stuck in some sort of limbo until this is decided, and in a worse place if it's approved. I almost didn't add this because I really don't like it when people throw things around gratuitously. But I shared it with someone and they said I needed to say. For decades, people of color in Bethel have been talking to me about racism because I live in an interracial household. Some of those people are still living in Bethel and many of them have left town. And I've always pointed to our street as an example, extremely diverse. Everyone gets along, the town pretty much leaves us alone. Now that this plan for something in Bethel has come to light, they're the ones pointing to my street and saying to me, do you hear me now? Do you get it? And I don't have a good answer for them as to why Bethel thinks it would be an improvement. According to the master plan, none of us live there. It isn't personal. We'd be aiming for this no matter who lived there. But it is personal to us. We do live there. And this neighborhood has had a significantly minority presence long before I moved in 1985. If no one noticed that when the plan was made, shame on you. And if it was noticed, I don't even know what to say about that. But I do have 2 suggestions for the board. First, if you approve this change, that you stop pretending that this is still a wonderful place to call home. And second, that you think about having this built across from your lovely homes on your small streets.
For the record, The commission is in receipt of a traffic forecast study presented to the commission by Jeanette Moore. Anyone else very soon?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure, was there a question on traffic? We should ask Joe to respond to right now.
That's fine.
Record Joe Voskis, traffic engineer. A couple things, just starting at the end, with the last comment about the article from 2014 years ago. Yeah, it's an article, that's all it is. There's no one licensed, no one, it wouldn't be accepted in the court of law, wouldn't be accepted by the state traffic administration, so it's hearsay if anything. I'm not a legal person, but it would not be accepted anywhere, an article like that. Despite it being online, it would not be acceptable from anyone. And anyone who's reviewing traffic studies would not be acceptable. It can't be referenced in a court of law. That's the fact. So in terms of the questions, yes, in terms of Diamond Avenue and access. So Elgin and Whitney, yes, that's an issue. That potential cut through. I measured it. It's 500 feet longer. It's a narrow. I looked at Elgin and Whitney 6 years ago. I guess it was 6 years ago for the TOD studies. I expressed some concerns about that. And that's why we looked at doing some changes to Diamond Avenue Greenwood, recognizing that could be potentially a cut through. So it's a longer drive to go cut through. Don't know yet if it's going to be cut through. We have to look at it. And there's a right turn lane on Green Avenue on Grassy Plain Street. There's a no turn on red. There's a right turn overlap. Remember that works there. So how efficient is that right turn? Basically, to come down to the time to go through those two signals versus cutting through. And you're going slower on Elgin and Whitney. You've got narrow roads. You're going longer. So I can't upon you. We have to look at it. It is a valid question. We have to look at that as part of the traffic study. It could be a cut through. Maybe if there is a cut through, it's identified. Maybe some controls are needed there to address that. So that's that. Kiss and ride. Have not evaluated kiss and ride impacts. Have not. I wouldn't say it's a drain. I would say that the current transportation funding money is flowing from the federal government, flowing like never before. So I know the town put together an application for a pedestrian bridge over rail tracks a number of years ago. Money is flowing. I think the chances are much better now to get a grant for something like that to happen. So I wouldn't call it a dream. I would say that if the money is there and available on a multitude of projects, something like this. And then in terms of Diamond Avenue itself, yeah, I've been on. I did the Grand. I worked on that. I've done Caroluzzi's. I've been around town. I've driven down Diamond. I've walked on Diamond Avenue. You're absolutely right. It's a very quiet street. Not a lot of traffic on it. Absolutely agree with that. This project is going to generate traffic. I said it before. We are going to generate traffic. But I'm trying to say to you about the industrial is that you don't have industrial traffic now, but this could be an industrial development. If it were industrial development, you would have traffic, you'd have truck traffic, you'd have diesel truck traffic, you'd have that. You won't have that as much as with this zone change. That's what I want to make a point. But yes, it is going to generate traffic. We'll have to look at that traffic. We know Diamond Avenue is quaint, it's wide, it can accommodate the traffic. The question is the intersections of Diamond Avenue, Green Avenue. We'll have to look at that as part of the detailed traffic study. And the state will require us to look at that as well. I think those are the questions that I was asked to look at. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. Couple of quick responses while people are here in case we're not back for the continued hearing. Again, for the record, Neil Marcus. First of all, John raises the issue of failure to communicate. So I guess I want to apologize to Mrs. Moy if I mischaracterized her letter. But on page 2, where she bolded the words that to your first reaction to the proposal here, which is to create TOD zone, is are they crazy? I read that as you're not in favor of the TOD zone. But when your next sentence says, again, in bold, my first reaction to the master plan was, quote, over my dead body, I became pretty convinced that you didn't like the master plan, which is the basis of the TOD zoning. So I will apologize that I misread you because apparently I didn't realize that you don't like the master plan, but you would factor out the TOD zone, which you do like. It was very difficult for me to understand that. So I truly am sorry if I mischaracterized it. I will tell you, I still don't understand it, but I didn't want to mischaracterize it. Very briefly, we've heard some of the similar comments about traffic, and Joe, of course, has addressed traffic. Allison St. Germain, and again, I apologize. I do have your letter. I didn't go into quite as much detail again. I'm cognizant of the fact that I don't have unlimited time, but a lot of your questions this evening, which are not those that were raised in your letter, deal with the economics of this project. Again, I use the economics in two terms. One is, can this project really be viable given empty storefronts on Greenwood Avenue? And I will tell you that I'm not sure that that's ultimately the issue of the zoning amendment. Because in reality, there are a lot of court cases that exist on the books in Connecticut that tell you that planning and zoning really doesn't get into competition and non-competition. And people who come out and say, well, we don't want that gas station there because it's going to hurt the gas station across the street. That's not actually well received in planning and zoning, but that's a typical case where they say that the decision in those types of cases oftentimes abuses the discretion of the commission. So I'm going to say that your questions are really more geared towards what's the Economic Development Commission doing for development of the empty space, and how do they foresee the best way to develop new space in town. But that's not really the issue today. But a lot of the comments, I think, fail to recognize any change. And John, I'm going to say the same thing about some of your comments. You say that you gave us 3 reasons, which I appreciate. There are 169 signatures of people in the neighborhood who want to keep the I zone. Well, they want to keep the I zone because they're used to what the Kellogg's are doing there, which, by the way, as I said earlier, everybody supports. They're just good neighbors. Place looks good, it's neat, and doesn't make a lot of noise. And somebody said they smell the fresh wood. If you're like me, I love that smell. It's I can live on a building site or the building of wood. But the future is not necessarily the Kellogg operation. As a matter of fact, I will tell you that from comments that they've made, that definitely isn't the future, because if it were, they wouldn't be trying to change the zone of the property so that it could be sold for use, which they believe, and I believe, and Adriano believes, and what we need to convince the commission to believe, is the future for this neighborhood. And then, in fact, the industrial zone is fine. But if the Kellogg operation were to stop tomorrow, I'm not exactly sure that everybody would like the next industrial use of that property. Because quite honestly, I'm not sure what it would be. Because if you analyze zoning trends, that's an awful site for an industrial zone. I mean, you got to drive through a well-developed residential neighborhood to get into it. It's a leftover, again, from the days when the Dolans were running, a supply shop on Greenwood Avenue, and building supplies and fuels. So it's just you've got to look towards the future and say, if there's an opportunity now to have a zoning plan in effect that will address the use of that site 10 years from now, well, let's do it now rather than wait to see the empty building. Which brings me to another one of your suggestions, John. why don't we just build this in Reading? Well, I gotta tell you, if they took this down to the Gilbert and Bennett factory in Georgetown today, the town of Reading would welcome it with open arms. However, when I came to the town of Reading about 40 years ago with Felix Charney in his proposal for the development of the Gilbert and Bennett factory, the town of Reading unanimously killed it at zoning, with their zoning commission, because it wasn't Reading-like. It wasn't in the character of the town of Reading. And the fact that we said it certainly beats empty, burnt-out industrial buildings with broken glass windows, which, by the way, if you get down there today, that's what you'll see. Because quite honestly, 40 years ago, the town of Reading didn't have the foresight to see a change, but that included this exact type of development, housing, some retail. I remember the movie theater. There was a train station being moved from Branchville to Georgetown. It was perfect, but again, a lot of people objected to more than 169, by the way. And I was there, beating my head against the wall. And today, about 2 years ago, Julie Pemberton called me and said, "Are you still friendly with Felix Charney?" I said, "Very." She said, "See if you can bring him back." She said, "That would be the best use of that property." But you know what? The ship sailed. The location is not the same as this type of location in downtown Bethel, which is much more likely to attract the pedestrian type of use than even Georgetown. And again, on affordable housing, you're preaching to the choir. The only affordable housing projects that have been approved in Reading were those that I petitioned for and actually went to the Superior Court and approved. The problem with the town of Reading and affordable housing, it's not very Reading-like, and then of course, a lot of our senior citizens had to move out of Reading when they couldn't live on 4 acres of land in what we call those large 4,000 square foot houses, which today seem modest, but they had to move out of town. There was no house. There's no housing choice. But the fact of the matter is, Reading is unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say, unique in the fact that it is mostly a public water supply. And as a result of that, it's a different town. So, I mean, we can criticize Reading because I do, and I live there because it's darn convenient when you have an office in Bridgeport and an office in Danbury. I live in Reading, but it's a great town. But on the other hand, its housing concepts are not something that I think we need to compare to the town of Bethel. Bethel is much more forward-looking, and I think the numbers that you quoted in terms of affordable housing are incredible. It's certainly remarkable, and to the extent I've had any involvement with that, I'm actually proud of what the town has done. But the other thing is that spending money on industrial property, Francis Clark again. Francis Clark is challenged because of its transportation issues. You have a low bridge, and you're not near an interstate highway. But as challenging as Francis Clark has been all these years, relatively successful, and investing there, I believe, is a much better investment than on Diamond Avenue, because that is even more challenged in terms of access. And as I said earlier, just improperly located for industrial use. The I-zone does create jobs. I agree with that. But also the mixed use project that we're talking about will create jobs as well. The fact of the matter is, I'm sorry that I don't want to suggest that Bethel should turn into Brookfield. And I don't want to suggest that Bethel should turn into Ridgefield. What I'm suggesting is that Bethel should take a look at any of the towns around here. And if you see a project that makes sense because it looks good, it achieves the purpose for which it was built, and it works, then you can use that project as an example of what you might want to achieve if you feel that it's appropriate for the zone. And in reality, the plan of development's already said that. The master plan would indicate that the type of development that has been successful in the Four Corners Not necessarily Federal Road, I'm not talking about BJ's, I'm not talking about Costco. But that type of development right there in the Four Corners, Brookfield Village, is a type of development that meets some of the goals of the master plan. And the same thing with the housing that has occurred in downtown Richfield. That type of pedestrian-friendly housing is something that is a goal for the plan of development. So the fact that you can go look at it in an adjoining town shouldn't suggest that you turn into Richfield or Brookfield. Bethel is unique. And so in terms of the questions that have been raised, the positions that have been taken, that is my response for this evening. Obviously, as was indicated, Commission intends to keep it open, in particular because the commission may have more questions. So we'll rest this evening and be available for your continuation. Thank you.
Mr. Marcus, you might want to stay up here for a second. I did ask a specific question tonight that had come up over the ensuing time, and that was this zone change is based upon the concept plan that was presented. So the specific question is, what part of the project comes first? Is it the four-story apartment buildings in the back? And that way we only get apartments because the two properties in the front are existing and they're operating well? Or are we getting it all in one fell swoop? Is the entire project happening all at once? Because the thing that I think a lot of residents are very upset about would be that 200 plus more apartments go in and then nothing else happens. So that is a very big concern. So when I do talk about, and I completely understand, the Economic Development Commission is completely separate from planning and zoning, which we have to follow our regulations, but we do not operate in a silo. We live in a town that this will impact our schools. So my question is, was not answered, is which comes first? Is it the 4 building units in the back, or is it the entire concept plan as presented?
Mr. Chairman, if I can, I can actually answer that. Again, in the scheme of planning and zoning, the first thing we need to do is to have the zoning available to create the master plan. This particular zone change requires us to have a concept plan. We have that. But the master plan, which is what you're talking about, would come at the design review special exception in site plan permitting stage. And what we do with any plans, any projects of magnitude, for example, we're involved, I represent Toll Brothers over on the west side of Danbury. And as you can, if you've ever seen the development on that side of Danbury, it has been in phases. And each phase has a certain design requirement in terms of number of units, in terms of mix between commercial and residential, et cetera. And that's all in a master plan that is phased by the commission, well, phased at the request of the developer, but by the commission. So if the commission, when it actually hears the application, will say that if it's buildings 1 and 2 are residential, that's phase 1, then phase 2 must be a commercial space with less residential, or vice versa. Phase 1 has to be the residential and commercial mixed building, and phase 2, the 100% residential units. That's commonly done in any large project because it's rare that you come in and build a project in one fell swoop. So if you go up to Newtown right now, in exit 9, there's a rather large the Stanley Simon property that was behind the new church that's on 25. If you look at that project, it's a perfect example of a large, that is entirely residential, but a large residential project that was approved in phases. And one phase cannot begin until the last phase is either completed or reaches a certain percentage of occupancy or completion. That criteria is set out by this commission, but not in the zone change because they don't have a plan. no one can develop the real plan, the final plan, until you know that the zoning is there. Otherwise, you're spending a really important fortune on engineering and architectural work for a property that's industrially zoned. So we've spent, by the way, a great deal of money in the design concept, but that's as far as we can go now. But your question is absolutely spot on. That is, will this commission do phasing? And will the public have some participation in that phasing? And the answer is yes. I think the commission will do phasing because we're going to ask them to. And yes, the public can come in and comment, and it would be appropriate for the public to participate in how that phasing occurs. And again, Joe Volskus will have something to say about that during that process, because traffic, he's talked about overall traffic, but traffic at each phase may require some traffic controls, modifications, roadway improvements, etc. And that is the balance that the commission has to achieve. So the answer to your question is, it will happen. I can guarantee you that this project will be phased, and I can guarantee you that the commission will come up with a proper phasing plan. It won't be unilateral because it will be cooperatively developed. Otherwise, the project's never get built. And by the way, the other factor in phasing is financing. There are very few developers who can go out and spend multi-million dollars out of their pocket without getting some sort of institutional or banking support. And when you do that, your lenders are more concerned about phasing. They want to know about market absorption. So if a developer says, I'm going to build 150 units in the first year, the bank may say, show us that you can actually, the market will absorb 150 units in the first year. And the answer is it probably won't. And the compromise is that you'll build 70 units and you won't get to start the 71st until the first 30 are occupied and CO'd. That's how phasing works. So it's not, it is really, it's an art and a science rolled in together, and it takes the cooperation of the commission and the applicant and the input from the public. Because in reality, once this project is approved, nobody wants to see it developed improperly where it can't succeed. And phasing has a lot to do with the success of the project. Thank you.
This time I'm going to continue the hearing to our next meeting, January the 10th of 2023, primarily for the purpose of the missing commission members to be able to address the applicant and ask their questions. And we're going to hold that in meeting room D, starting at 7 p.m. that evening. Meeting room D upstairs.
Zoom for now.
That's to be determined.
Thank you all for your participation.
Thank you.
Meeting Rob Wallace. On the minutes, take a look at a few minutes from our last meeting.
Yep.
To accept the minutes from the last meeting.
You'll need this.
Favor? Yes. Abstentions? So moved.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're trying to have the
You guys, please either sit and quietly watch the meeting. They went to the hallway. We have lots of other things to cover. Thank you.
Except for you.
Sit down, John. So we have, an invoice.
Yeah, 1,000. Hold on a minute.
I'm just going to officially take a moment to wish you all a good holiday.
Thanks, Neil.
See you.
See you in the meeting.
Thank you guys.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to pay the invoice of $1,016.46 for legal notices.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All against? Abstentions? So moved. Work session, Beth, you have information for us on Cornet Machinery Corporation? Or we're just gonna schedule a public hearing for that?
Yeah. So, Trowbridge is coming in, they're asking for a special permit to have outside storage. You need a special permit and a public hearing in order to have outside storage. So, the request is to schedule it for January 10th. I've already loaded some information into the Google Drive in regards to that. And then we do a public hearing.
So a motion to schedule a public hearing for Cornet Machinery Corp. 8 Trowbridge Drive for January the 10th. All in favor? Against? Abstentions? Abstention.
No. Sorry, I was second, I was waiting.
So moved.
Next time.
Next item is the 830G application for 17 Whitney Road.
That needs to be, state 30G application, it's on for acceptance and scheduling, suggested date is supposed to be February 14th, 2023.
Motion to schedule a public hearing for 17 Whitney Road, 830G application for February the 14th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? So moved. There's another item I want to add to the agenda, just very quickly. I'd like to suggest that we hold a public meeting in January to discuss input on the current TOD regulations, and how we should move forward with those in the next year. And we'll have a second on that.
Second.
All in favor?
It's basically what you're looking for is to do, I think your first meeting is probably the best.
Yeah, January 10th.
And all that, my suggestion would be is to have it be a, excuse me, my back is power beats my head to stand and I'm wiggling. It's not a public hearing, you don't want to do legal notices, spend all that money on that. Just a public informational meeting where the public can come and give you their input on the TOD regs, right?
Yes,
It's not a discussion, you're not having a discussion with the public. You're just
collecting input.
collecting input from them, because you already are planning to have a meeting at the end of the month. Look at the regulations. Just because some of you were involved with some of the items that are going on now. Is this an informal process? It's a formal process. It's just gonna be, let's get some input, then the board will take it, and look at it. We tweak the regulations, and then once that is done, then the formal process starts. And that's a process. It's the legal steps that they have to do by statute. But I think that's a good, I think, chair, I agree, I think that's a good opportunity. By the chair and the commission,
What date?
January 10th.
My only concern about January 10th is that if we're still going to be discussing the zoning change, I think that's a lot to have a conversation.
That is
about
true.
time.
And that wasn't an expectation. So I agree, you're absolutely right. Betty. So let's put it on the 24th. Because I really was trying to reserve January to we can discuss some of the TOD.
Go back to 124.
124. Thank you, Penny.
Thank you. Beth, do you have any other business to cover? Commissioner? Motion opposed, adjourned.
Second.
In favor?
Oh,
I'm sorry. You'll have to come up to the mic.
Yellow is going.
Right now.
Okay, Jay.
J Liberty, 8 Grand Street. In view of the fact that you are going to be discussing and changing potentially the TOD, in fact, that they're doing the traffic study that also may impact this. And Beth made the point in November that any applications that come in are still going to be treated with the existing regulations. So it sounds like if you're not even going to be starting to take public input until the end of January, and then you guys are going to be tweaking, that it might be not until March that you have a new TOD plan to present and to vote in.
Or potentially longer.
It'll be longer. So during that whole period of time, new applications can come in. So I'm just suggesting that, and I know you guys don't like moratoriums, but just until you get your new regulations set, could you have a moratorium on new applications?
I don't believe we can do that. I would just.
Can I answer that question?
Yes.
The answer to that question would be based on the need. If the TOD regulations are totally inept in all areas and all aspects of the town, then that would be cause to have a moratorium. But if there are just certain areas of the regulations or of the town itself where they need to be tweaked or changed or whatever do it, and it can be done in a timely fashion based on reports from the public, based on their own experiences with POD regs over the last 3 years, where they can make decisions as to what is working, what needs to be looked at again. And we're talking about the regulations, not the plan. Just talking about the regs. I think that would be part of the decision and of the discussion. But in order to do a moratorium, you really should have just cause. And usually it involves a major, it would be the overall TOD. You know, if you're asking for a moratorium on the whole TOD, that really would need to be looked at by the commission and a lot of focus given to it to why it's not working. That's what we do. You know. And for example, I'll give you an example of a moratorium that we did. And that had to do with marijuana. This moratorium on marijuana was based on a direct application that came in. The focus was not on anything else except for the fact that people did not want to have any type of marijuana grown, sold, lost of sold, whatever, within the town of Bethlehem. So in order to do that, because at the time we didn't understand medical marijuana or the potential for retail marijuana, we put a moratorium. And then we developed the regulation saying, no. That makes sense. You're looking at it. Okay. All right, that's good.
Any other public input? Now I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Third. Aye.
Okay.